This, Jesse, is visibly, to me, a non-expert, irrefutable. We heard from another criminalist from LAPD. She did the actual forensic analysis of the inflatable pool, in addition to material that was sent to her by the LA County Medical Examiner's Office that was collected during the victim's autopsy. Now, that includes, I mentioned her soiled clothing, and bits of blue plastic found during the autopsy that were essentially embedded in her remains. So this criminalist actually pieced those bits of blue plastic in with the rest of the inflatable pool that she processed and analyzed, including work that was done under a microscope. And there were exhibits shown during court today, photos of how those pieces from the autopsy fit in like a puzzle with the rest of that blue inflatable pool. So there was a bit of back and forth. The prosecutor spent quite a bit of time questioning this witness, Lisa Alejandro from LAPD, about her background, her expertise, how she did this work, and what it showed. They described the linear cuts in the pool, exactly where in the pool she noted them. There were 4 different areas of damage, what she found on the underside of the pool, and how this all fits in with the larger picture that's being painted, which is that Celeste may have been dismembered in this pool.
Taking a step back before we get in more into the substance of the testimony.
Fake blood, a blue inflatable pool, cell phone data that maps a route north, 3 pieces of evidence, 3 separate stories, and 1 preliminary hearing trying to hold them all together. First, investigators found jugs of fake blood in a garage, and the defense says it points to something far less sinister than prosecutors claim. Second, forensic analysts matched fragments of blue plastic pulled from a body to a torn inflatable pool, a detail that, if it holds up, becomes hard to explain away. Third, geolocation data from a phone and a Tesla traced the same path on the same night toward the same remote lake, more than once.
This is fascinating, and if you're somebody who likes to nerd out on data, this is going to be the most interesting part of this testimony for you. Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. So right now, right before we broke for lunch, we were hearing LAPD testimony from their expert who analyzed not only the Tesla data, but David's cell phone data. So we're actually seeing maps right now where this expert is pinpointing where the vehicle, according to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County. Now, this is interesting, too. This has come up before in charging documents, but he's testifying both the vehicle data and the phone data show additional trips up there after that first road trip on April 24th of 2025. And that's, of course, the morning after or overnight going into the morning after the victim was allegedly killed.
And underneath all of it, one question the record has not yet answered: what actually killed Celeste Rivas Hernandez? This is not a verdict.
Yeah, so as you just heard, there is a lot to get into as we talk about day 3 of this preliminary hearing for singer David. Remember, he is accused of sexually abusing, murdering, and dismembering 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez back in 2025. Her dismembered, decomposed remains reportedly found in the front trunk of a Tesla out in LA back in September of last year, a Tesla that was reportedly registered to the singer. So the question becomes for this preliminary hearing, does the prosecution have enough? Is the court going to determine that there is sufficient evidence to support these charges for this case to move forward against David?
This is day 3 of a preliminary hearing where the bar is lower than trial and where documented testimony, not speculation, is what matters.
We're in day 3 now of this preliminary hearing, and it started with a little bit of drama this morning. There was actually a reporter who was kicked out of the courtroom. The judge excluded her from today's proceedings because apparently there were live transmission rules that were violated. So this court has been very strict about preserving the integrity of this case. And we've talked about this before. Obviously, no cameras are allowed in that courtroom, no phones. You know, I'm not communicating with you guys, with really anybody in the outside world, as all of this is going down. And it's part of this larger, I think, respect of the integrity of this court. And the spirit of this court, because they want to ensure everything is done properly. Nobody here wants to risk any kind of mistrial, anything leaking that is not supposed to. So right now, during this court break, we can talk to you about what exactly went down.
Here's what's actually been said in that courtroom, and where the record still leaves gaps. Let's start with the fake blood, because it's the detail the defense is leaning on hardest right now. During testimony this week, an LAPD criminalist told the court she located jars and containers of fake blood inside the garage of the singer known as D4V, who is charged in connection with the death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The defense used that detail to introduce an alternative explanation, arguing the garage doubled as a space for producing music merchandise, meaning shirts and other items deliberately stained to look bloody for marketing purposes.
This seems to be where the defense is saying there could be some sort of alternative explanation. So, Julia, what happened today? What was the defense trying to suggest?
If you've been following this case online, you've probably seen clips of David's music videos, especially the ones where he's dressed in a white t-shirt with fake bloodstains. So this came up today in court, and it was the first time I've heard it during this preliminary hearing. Apparently, one of the LAPD criminalists found jugs and jars of fake blood in David's garage. Now, they didn't get into, how much of it was there, but the defense did state that there was some merchandising activity going on in David's garage, meaning they were making music merch, and that could have been, t-shirts and sweatshirts stained with fake blood. So does that explain all the evidence that was documented and collected? No, absolutely not. But it does explain the fake blood. And how did they know it was fake? LAPD did have their forensic team go out there and test it. It came back negative. It was not taken into evidence. But I think the presence of that in David's garage does set up, a new narrative for the defense to potentially seize.
It's worth sitting with that claim for a second because it is documented that the substance was tested. LAPD's forensic team ran it, and it came back negative for human blood. It was not entered into evidence as biological material. Here's the complication. A negative test on one substance doesn't erase the other biological evidence found in that same garage, and prosecutors have not treated the fake blood as central to their case. What it does do is give the defense a foothold, a plausible, testable, real-world reason why blood, like substances, existed in that space, separate from anything connected to the victim. Whether jurors, if this goes to trial, find that persuasive is a different question. Right now, on the record, it's one data point, tested and ruled out as human blood, sitting alongside other evidence that has not been ruled out the same way. That's the pattern worth noticing in a case like this. Online, the fake blood detail spread fast, framed as damning. In court, it was framed and tested very differently. That gap between what circulates and what's actually documented is going to come up more than once in this case, and it's worth remembering every time a new detail breaks online before it's been tested in a courtroom. Now to the inflatable pool, because this is the piece of testimony that moved the needle most in this hearing. A separate L8D criminalist testified that she conducted forensic analysis on a blue inflatable pool recovered during the investigation, and cross-referenced it against material collected during Celeste's autopsy by the LA County Medical Examiner's Office. That material reportedly included small fragments of blue plastic found embedded in her remains. According to testimony, the criminalist worked under a microscope to physically match those fragments to torn sections of the pool, describing 4 separate areas of damage, including linear cuts and damage noted on the underside of the pool itself. Exhibit photos were shown in court, illustrating how the fragments fit against the torn material.
I saw something in your notes regarding this specific moment as they're talking about this, the remains, as they're talking about the last clothes worn by Celeste. Her family was there today, right? Her family was there today listening to all this. What was their reaction to it?
Wow, Jesse, I can't believe they're back in the courtroom today. You know, they sat through all of day 1 of this preliminary hearing, all of day 2. They walked in a little bit later this morning. They didn't show up until about 10:30, but they did catch all of this testimony from Lisa Lehendro. They did sit in the courtroom and see these exhibits, these photos of what their daughter was wearing when her remains were found. They did see the little bits of hair and plastic that were collected during her autopsy and how those bits of plastic fit with damage from this blue inflatable pool. I didn't see any kind of visible physical reaction. You know, on day 1, Mercedes, the victim's mother, she bowed her head and just started crying when we saw the photos and the contents of those cadaver bags found in the defendant's Tesla. This morning, I didn't see her react. It's like she was frozen. As we saw, it was a pair of Skechers brand socks, her daughter's underwear, her leggings that were cut into pieces. And that's because her legs were allegedly cut off at the kneecaps.
It's horrifying. I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. It's horrifying. It's unthinkable what happened to her. It is unthinkable what this family is going through. I've said it before, I'll say it again. They're not only navigating the loss of their daughter and how much spotlight is put on this case, but having to see these photos, having to hear this testimony, it does make me always wonder whether or not the prosecution is trying to present.
This is a documented forensic match testified to under oath, not a theory floated by commentators. It supports the prosecution's broader argument that the pool may have been used during the dismemberment of Celeste's body. That is a disturbing claim, and it deserves to be treated carefully, because a forensic match between plastic fragments and a torn pool is significant, but it is one link in a larger chain the prosecution still has to build. Here's the reframe. A pool match tells you something happened in proximity to that pool. It does not, on its own, tell you who killed her or how. That distinction matters, and it's one legal analysts covering this hearing have raised directly. The forensic evidence so far speaks heavily to concealment, cleanup, and disposal.
And here's why the criminalist said there really was no forensic value. She testified earlier that had they been used for dismemberment, there would have been no way for blood to be cleaned up to the point where their testing did not indicate something of forensic value. So when they did that initial test on scene and there was no presumptive positive, they elected not to take those 2 chainsaws into evidence. But yes, there is a missing one. There is another one, and I'm sure that's going to come up later in this testimony.
And in terms of a cleanup at all, you know, I know that there's a whole big back and forth yesterday about whether it's actually blood, possibly blood. Anything about a cleanup?
Yeah, they found a trash bag. This was part of that same witness's testimony. They found a trash bag. It was double bagged in the garage, and they did go ahead and test the interior bag. Again, there were 2 black plastic bags, and inside they found stained wipes, white wipes with some kind of brownish stain. We actually saw the exhibit photos. They were described as kind of like Clorox wipes used to clean. So I think what the prosecution is painting a picture of here is wipes used to clean up blood. And those wipes, according to this witness's testimony, did in fact test positive for the possible presence of blood. There's a question mark on a lot of this. It cannot be stated that it was positively identified as blood. That does require additional testing. But I think what this witness stated on the stand yesterday and today goes to show that there was plenty of biological evidence found during that search in David's garage.
It has been far thinner on the actual moment of death, which brings us to the cell phone and vehicle data, the piece of testimony that, for many watching this case, filled in a route rather than a motive. An AP analyst testified this week about geolocation data pulled from both the Tesla registered to the defendant and his personal cell phone. According to that testimony, the data shows the vehicle traveling from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard, then north along the coast into Santa Barbara County, on the same date, following the same timeline as the phone's location data. The analyst testified that this path aligns with the location where Celeste's passport card was later recovered, near Lake Cachuma off State Road 154. Notably, testimony indicated this wasn't a single trip.
Expert is pinpointing where the vehicle, according to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County. Now, this is interesting, too. This has come up before in charging documents, but he's testifying both the vehicle
data and the phone data reportedly show additional trips to that same area in the days following. This is documented, and it's specific enough to matter because it's not circumstantial in the vague sense. It's a data trail cross-referenced across two separate devices, pointing at the same location more than once. Prosecutors are clearly using it to support a theory of repeated visits tied to disposal or concealment. But here's the caveat that has to be flagged. Location data places a phone and a car somewhere. It does not, by itself, place a person's hands on anyone. That's a distinction defense attorneys are almost certain to raise if this moves toward trial. And it's one worth keeping in mind now, while the story is still being assembled in real time. This is actually a good place to pause on something competitor coverage of this case has mostly skipped past: an outgoing phone call. Testimony indicated that roughly 30 minutes to an hour after that Tesla left on its route north, an outgoing call was placed from the defendant's phone to Celeste's phone. Defense attorneys objected during that portion of testimony, specifically to make sure the court record reflected that the phone made the call, not, as stated on the record, that the defendant was proven to have made it himself. That's a small distinction, but a real one, and it's the kind of precision a preliminary hearing exists to enforce. Why does that call matter? If the timeline being presented is accurate, that call would have gone unanswered because Celeste was no longer alive to answer it. Analysts covering the hearing have floated the idea that a call like that could function as staged normalcy, the kind of thing someone does to create a record, suggesting they still expected contact. That is a theory, not a documented fact, and it should be labeled as one. The record shows the call happened. It does not yet show why. Now, here's the open question this hearing has not resolved, and it's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Multiple legal observers following this case, including some directly inside that courtroom, have pointed out that almost everything presented so far speaks to cleanup, concealment, and movement after the fact. Chainsaws, cleaning wipes that tested as a possible presence of blood, a pool with matching fragments, a data trail heading toward a lake.
So we ended yesterday with the cross-examination of an LAPD criminalist. She was the one who was called to process evidence found in David's garage. And that evidence included everything from trash bags to rubber floor mats to blood stains. She was the one who tested chainsaws found in David's house. This was just about a week after the car was found in the Hollywood tow yard with the victim's remains in the front trunk, of course. So they continued with that cross-examination, and there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws, so she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers. At one point yesterday, she even brought her notes back out to make sure that she gave precisely the information that was documented during this investigation. So she said there did not appear to be any kind of forensic value to those chainsaws that were found in the garage, and that's why they were not taken into evidence. So my big takeaway from all of this is that perhaps those were not the weapons or tools used for dismemberment, even though they were found in David's garage during this search.
Let me just clarify this point, just so it's clear for our audience. I heard there was reporting, maybe even testimony, about a missing chainsaw. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah.
And what about any evidence of a cleanup, including of the chainsaws? Correct me if I'm wrong about either of those points.
What has been comparatively thin, at least as of this point in the hearing, is direct evidence of the killing itself. No security footage, no eyewitness testimony describing the act. What actually happened in the moments Celeste died has not yet been laid out on the record. That's not a flaw in the case. Preliminary hearings exist to establish probable cause, not to present every piece of evidence, but it is a real documented gap, and it's worth asking yourself, watching this unfold, what you think that gap means. Does it suggest prosecutors are holding stronger evidence in reserve for trial, or does it suggest this case, however disturbing the physical evidence is, still has to answer its most basic question? That's a genuine open read, and reasonable people watching this hearing have landed in different places on it. One more detail worth flagging, because it hasn't gotten much attention outside courtroom reporting. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office reportedly filed a motion to seal additional details from Celeste's autopsy, effectively restricting what the medical examiner can say publicly. What has been stated is that her body showed a state of decomposition consistent with an extended period inside the vehicle. Beyond that, the specifics of cause of death have not been made public, and the medical examiner has not yet testified directly in this hearing as of the most recent session.
Curious to see if that happens, and I'm very curious to hear from him. It's Dr. Ode Ukpo. And what's significant here is that after the autopsy was conducted last fall, LAPD actually filed a motion. They initiated this motion to place additional details from this autopsy under seal, essentially gagging the coroner, the medical examiner leading this case. He did make a statement before that about the state of decomposition and the fact that the victim must have been in that car for quite some time. Beyond that, beyond the report that was issued, we have not heard from the medical examiner yet, so a lot of questions for him. We have heard that may happen today, but we're going to hear from at least 2 additional witnesses, so we'll see who the prosecution decides to call to the stand.
That's a documented restriction, not a rumor, and it's likely to matter a great deal once, or if that testimony becomes public. So where does that leave things? A pool with a forensic match. A data trail tracing the same overnight route more than once. A call placed to a phone that, by the timeline presented, could not have been answered.
That was interesting, and defense attorneys actually jumped in to object during that portion of testimony. It was sustained because they wanted to make sure the court record stated that the LAPD detective isn't testifying that David, the defendant, made a call. They wanted to make sure the court record stated his phone made that outgoing call. But that call was placed about half an hour to an hour after the Tesla got on the road heading north towards Santa Barbara County. So again, that speaks to the alleged cleanup and cover-up efforts. If he did in fact murder this girl, and if he was in fact on the way up to Lake Kachuma to dump evidence, why in the world would he call her phone? Of course, she's not going to pick up. She's dead in his house. So again, part of the cover-up, part of the alleged cover-up, we did.
And still a preliminary hearing that has not yet laid out on the record direct evidence of how Celeste died. Separating what's documented from what's assumed is the only way to actually follow a case like this responsibly. And this one is going to keep testing that line as it moves forward, especially once, or if the medical examiner takes the stand.
So far on the alleged cleanup, the dismemberment, the cleanup, trying to get rid of the evidence of this alleged killing. One of the questions I've been getting from legal analysts is, what has been the evidence that he actually murdered her? And what do I mean by that? A, the evidence that he actually killed her, that he stabbed her to death, and that he murdered her, right? Not that this was a case of manslaughter, not that this was a case of self-defense. So far in this preliminary hearing, what has stood out to you as the evidence that he murdered her?
None. There has not been any. This is circumstantial evidence. And what you pointed out the other day, Jesse, is that many of these incriminating Amazon and Home Depot purchases that were made online under a fake name for items like burn cages, fireproof mats, chainsaws, body bags, trash bags, they were not made until after April 23rd, again, the day of her alleged murder. So we haven't seen anything like home security video showing the actual killing. We have not heard from any witnesses who testified about being there and actually seeing this go down. We've heard a lot about why he may have done it, right, for financial gain. We've heard a lot about cleanup and cover-up efforts, including this road trip that is supported by data from both the car and the phone. But evidence about the murder itself and how it was carried out, where I think we're all waiting to see where that goes and what additional intel the prosecution has.
Well, here's the way I would look at it. I'm curious if the medical examiner is going to testify today or tomorrow. And if the medical examiner testifies, or people from the medical examiner staff testify, that she died from 2 penetrating wounds. So now you're saying, okay, she was killed. If they also match that up with text messages, which we haven't heard from yet, as far as I know, right? Messages between David and Celeste leading up to this night in April. If they can show they were fighting, if they can show she was going to expose him, and then he lures her there, gets her an Uber, and that there's no more activity from her cell phone after that night in April. He doesn't reach out to her, although I understand today there was a test, there was evidence today about him, about that phone call, so talk about that. But I think that's what we're looking for next. Maybe they started with the relationship, they started with the cover-up, and then they may move into the actual killing. Because look, at the end of the day, if they're saying, she went to his place, there's all this evidence of potentially dismemberment there, what else do you think happened? Although, this is this a slam dunk or not? So that's my thought. You can jump, you tell me what you think about it if you're hearing rumors of who else may testify.
That's where the record stands as of this hearing. If you've been following the testimony closely, drop your own read on that gap in the evidence down in the comments and follow along for the next update, because the next witness list is expected to include the one voice this case has been waiting on.